Hi there, my name is Sherry Forsyth and I'm a peak performance coach, and I'm doing a series on happiness. Last week we spoke about whether happiness can be as a result of external factors or not, and it all boils down to the quality of the relationships that we have that externally determine our happiness. A study that was done on people who had won the lotto as opposed to people who became paraplegics. And which one do you think would have been happier when they tested a year after the incidents had happened? Well, interestingly, they were both at the same level of happiness. So once again, that shows that external things do not necessarily determine your happiness, because we would have thought that the person that won the lotto would forever and ever be a lot happier than the person in a wheelchair. So today what I'm speaking about is the old saying, happiness comes from within. And I'm going to share a few ideas with you. But as always, because I'm a life coach, I like to give you some practical, actionable tools that will help you. So they're not in any particular order at all. And as always, just take from this video the things that you feel will apply to you. As always, I invite you to share your own thoughts. As I'm busy speaking, if you'd like to share or comment in the box below, I always welcome that hugely. So the most important thing we need to know is that we actually choose to be happy. It's a conscious decision. So despite the circumstances we may be in, we have the power to choose whether to be happy or unhappy, which is also linked in with choosing to be a victim or not to be a victim. So if you find yourself surrounded by negativity or negative thoughts a lot of the time, there's a thing called the positivity ratio, which means that if we want to cancel out a negative thought, we immediately replace it with 3 positive thoughts. So this is a concrete way of trying to enhance the positivity or the way your brain is functioning, rather than just the age-old saying of just be positive and it'll all come right. The second thing I'd like to speak about is the link between happiness and forgiveness. We can get locked in the unhappiness of forgiveness. In other words, I call them the black toxic thoughts of anger, resentment, revenge, all of those really dark emotions. And if we obviously are caught in those dark emotions, it's very difficult for us to be happy. However, if you engage in the forgiveness process, and it is a process, a difficult process, but if we engage in that process, what we do is we let go of those negative, dark, toxic thoughts. And by letting go of the darkness, light can come in. In other words, we make space for some happiness. I would also just like to mention that when we go through the process of forgiveness, it doesn't mean that we condone what the other person did to us at all. It doesn't mean that we forget it either. What we are choosing to do is not to be captive to those negative emotions within us. So we do the forgiveness process for ourselves to rid us of those negative thoughts. We don't do the forgiveness process for somebody else. While on the topic of forgiveness, maybe we also need to look at self-forgiveness, because it is very difficult for us to be happy when we are beating ourselves up all the time, or we are guilty because we are not being perfect. So the process of forgiveness is the same, whether you do it for other people or for yourself. But it is more difficult if you're going to forgive yourself. So I challenge you to maybe embrace the whole idea of forgiveness. Okay, so the next thing that we can do to make ourselves happy is very, very simple. We can smile, we can laugh, we can be enthusiastic. Just this morning when I was out exercising, I said hello to a chap as I was passing him. He was on his way to work. And when I greeted him, immediately his hands were up in the air and he said, you know, how are you today? Just the tone of voice was exciting and engaging. Anyway, he then proceeded to say, it's going to be very cold today. And so therefore, what I think you need to do is have a few cups of hot chocolate. And it would be really good if you could just cuddle up in bed all day. Now, he could have walked past me just saying good morning in a morose way. But actually, his enthusiasm was fabulous. And for the rest of my walk, I actually had this broad smile on my face because he had been so lovely and evidently so happy. So we can choose that attitude. The next thing I want to speak about is a chap called Robert Holden, who is from the Happiness Project in the UK. And he talks about 3 myths of happiness. And these are things that if we believe them, can stop us from being happy. So the first myth is that happiness is always somewhere else. We've got to go and look for it. So it's very much the fear of FOMO, fear of missing out. And so we can't be happy with what we've got at the moment because we're so busy thinking there'll be something better that will come along. Okay? So that is the first myth. The second myth I found interesting is that to be happy is to be seen as being selfish. How much happiness is good enough for us? And if we are feeling that we are being selfish by being happy, it can make us feel guilty and all sorts of things. However, as in the previous example of the chap that I walked past, remember that emotions are contagious. So if I'm happy, I'm much more likely to influence other people to be happy as well. So that second myth of happiness being selfish is definitely not true. The third myth is that how much happiness do I need to really be happy? And if I've got too much and life is just absolutely great and I'm so happy, I'll be waiting for the other shoe to drop. In other words, I will feel the happiness is going to come to an end because after all, we have to deserve to be happy. We have to earn our happiness. We have to work hard for our happiness. We have to suffer for it. Okay? So because we believe that, we sometimes sabotage our own happiness. So in other words, we are not believing that this happiness can last, and we are just waiting for the karma police to come and wave its magic wand, and we will have to then pay for the happiness that we currently are experiencing. Obviously, that is also a myth. So according to Robert Holden, there is one key thing that everybody who is happy does. Do you have any idea about what that might be? One thing. They enjoy their life just as it is. Okay, I want to repeat that because it's so important. They enjoy their life just as it is. They don't have the most of material possessions. They don't earn the most money. They don't live in the best house. They don't drive the fancy car. They don't have the perfect relationships. But what they do is they choose to make themselves happy with what they have at the moment. So in other words, it's choosing to live in the now, not what might be, but actually being grateful for what is at the moment. I think that's a huge thing. Okay, he also says that in order to help us to be happy, there's one question that we can ask ourselves every day, and we must repeat it 3 times. So the question is, one way I can make my day more enjoyable today is, mention one thing, ask yourself the question for the second time, mention the second thing, and then the third thing. I'd also like to quote what Robert Holden says. Happiness is not just the opposite. Sorry. Happiness is not just the absence of sadness. It is also the capacity to love and heal that sadness. So for people who are stuck in the victim mode because this awful thing has happened to them and therefore they believe they can never be happy, this quote shows that that in fact is not true. Despite sadness, we can find happiness. The next person I want to talk about is a chap called Dan Gilbert in a TED talk called The Surprising Science of Happiness. He says that essentially our brain has a psychological immune system which allows us, in fact, to change our view of the world to make us happier. And obviously this all happens on a chemical and subconscious level. So we don't have to find happiness, but the way we view the world, we kind of are tinged towards trying to make ourselves happier. So they did a test on people who had suffered a trauma, and 3 months after the trauma, they tested them against average population. And yes, you've guessed it, they were pretty much the same, because our brain works to help us to be happier, unless we choose to be the victim, because then we are making that active choice and that's where we'll stay. So there's an interesting story about a chap, Maurice Bickham, who was in jail for 37 years, wait for it, for a crime he didn't commit. Now, can you imagine the resentment, the anger, all of those kind of things that would happen for most of us if we were asked to pay for a crime that we didn't commit? We think of Nelson Mandela, who's similar. Anyway, when he was interviewed after he was finally released from prison, he said it had been a glorious experience. How can he say that? He can say that because our external circumstances do not make us happy. Because we can work internally and we can choose happiness is the reason that he could say that after 37 years in jail. According to research done by Dr. Gilbert, there's also a difference between natural happiness and synthetic happiness. Natural happiness being we are happy when we get what we want. Okay, then that makes us happy. Synthetic happiness is when we don't get what we want, and then we have to work towards finding our happiness. So both actually are really good. Some people are much better at synthesizing happiness than others. So this psychological immune system, interestingly, it works best when in fact we are stuck, when we are in a negative place, when possibly we cannot change our circumstances. Then our ability to synthesize happiness is far greater, far more developed. And that is why you can have Maurice Bickham saying that after 37 years in jail, he was happy. Okay, because at that time he couldn't change his situation, but he chose to be happy. How amazing is that? The next tool that I'd like to share with you is from a lady called Katarina Blom, who has written a book called The Science of Happiness. And she says that happiness is not just positive thinking. In fact, we're often told, just sharpen up and think positive thoughts and then you'll be happy. That is not possible. Happiness is a skill. And what makes it easier to become happy, in her opinion, is not only must you make the choice to be happy, but you must, instead of just trying to change your thoughts, which are really difficult to do, we need to take actions. Okay, so if we are wanting to be happy, we need to do something to make ourselves happy. And so this actually leads me directly onto the next point, which was a TED talk I listened to by a mother called Jacqueline Way. And if you remember in the last video on happiness, I mentioned the neuroscience of happiness, and it shows us that when we are giving and when we are receiving, there's a beautiful chemistry that takes place in our body that allows us to feel good. So that's an increase of the dopamines and the serotonins, all those feel-good chemicals. And there's a decrease in the cortisol or the stress hormones. So she decided to put this physiology or neuroscience into practice. And she has a thing called the 365 challenge. The 365 day challenge. Because we feel so much better when we give. She started by challenging her little three-year-old son to do something nice for somebody else, and to do that every day. And this has now been rolled out in lots of schools, not only in the States, but also in the UK. And it's called the 365-day challenge, which I challenge you on. If we know that it makes us feel better physiologically by giving, well then let's give. Let's try the 365-day challenge. You can give to people, you can give to animals, you can give to the planet, but let's give and let's harness that feel-good chemistry. There's also another way of being kind. A lot of people know about a random act of kindness that you can take on every day. These are pretty much, they're the same thing. Then according to Benjamin Hardy, he has a very interesting concept. What we put into our brain will determine our outlook. Our outlook will help us to change our behavior. And if we change our behavior, we can change ourselves and therefore our levels of happiness. So he's saying you need to know who you want to be, and then take the action, once again, take the action to make sure that happens. And he quotes a chap who was hugely overweight, and he decided that he needed to be, for his own health, but also for his happiness, he needed to lose a lot of weight. So he went into the local clothing store and he asked for 2 suits, quite expensive suits, but at a size that patently was not going to fit him. And the guy who was selling him the suit said, "So sorry, sir, can I ask who these suits are for?" And when he said, "Yes, they're for me," obviously the sales clerk didn't act hugely well. But he had decided that he wanted to be a thin person. He invested in money and time to make sure that he bought those suits that one day he was going to fit into. Okay, so that's the example I'll give you, and I think that's also very, very valid. The next thing I want to speak about is very poignant. It's a TED talk done by a young chap called Sam Burns, called My Philosophy for a Happy Life. So why was it so meaningful? Because Sam, at the age of 17, actually suffers from a very rare disease called progeria, where you age very, very rapidly. And so this obviously was a hugely stressful situation for him to be in. And that is why I think his words are so amazing. What makes them even more amazing was that it wasn't even a month after this interview, he actually very sadly passed away. So, what are his views on happiness? He has three points, and then he's added a final one. The first one is, I'm okay with what I can't do, because I'm so grateful for what I can do. Okay, so I'm grateful for what I can do. I'm not going to be living in regret for what I can't do. So he chooses to focus on his passions, the things that he's really excited about. And he loves music, so he was playing in the school band. He chooses to do the things that he loves to do. He chooses to do the things that make him happy. He chooses according to his passion. Okay, the second thing is he surrounds himself with high quality people. And that underlines what we spoke about in that long-term study on happiness by Harvard, where what really makes us happy is the people in our lives. So he is already confirming that for us. The third thing that he mentions is that we need to keep forward, keep moving forward. We need to be looking forward to something, even if it's something really small, but not to be static all the time, particularly in our emotions. So he says when he does have the bad emotions, which will happen to all of us, he doesn't just push them away, as lots of people think that'll make us happy. No, he says acknowledge the feelings, know that they're there, experience them for a short time, and then let them go, and then move forward onto something that you're looking forward to. And then his last thing was so cute. He said, and the last thing, just before I go, is don't ever miss a party. And he said, in fact, he was preparing for their homecoming dance, which was going to be happening in a few days' time. So that was a very, very emotive TED Talk, and certainly one that I would highly recommend. He really embraces that whole idea of it's not what happens to you that can make you happy or sad. It's how you choose to respond. Okay, so I'd like to read a quote by Valerie Bertinelli. Happiness is a choice. You can choose to be happy. There is going to be stress in life, but it is your choice whether you let it affect you or not. Okay. Then, according to the Buddhist Jen Kelsang Nyema, she says our happiness is all in our mind. And she mentions 3 questions that we should ask ourselves if we are starting to do a little bit of introspection about happiness. The first one is, are you having a good day? The second one is, why is it such a good day or bad day? Okay. And the third one is, tomorrow, would you rather have a good day or a bad day? Now, the answer to number 2 is really important. The question number 2 was, why is it such a good or bad day for me? And depending on what those answers are, we will know what makes us happy or not. And if it is a whole list of external conditions that are making us happy, we are likely to, well, it's a very unstable way of relying on external circumstances. We, in other words, are putting our happiness in the hands of other people or other things, and that's quite disempowering. So what we need to go within. We don't want that sort of unstable external happiness. We want to go within. And she says there are 2 things that we need to do for internal happiness. The first one is stop outsourcing our happiness to the external conditions. Okay? We can't blame others for whether we're happy or whether we're not happy. It is our choice. And then secondly, to find a source from within that will make us happy. She says happiness and unhappiness actually are both states of mind. And if they are a state of mind, we can choose happiness or not. And so how do we get to that peaceful state of mind? In her opinion, meditation is the answer. Okay, and lastly, I'm quoting from a chap called Sean Anker. His TED talk is called The Happiness Advantage, linking positive brains to performance. And he is in the whole area of positive psychology, where they study the brain and how it affects our emotions and particularly our positivity. Our brains are very complex, and one of the things that they do for us is, well, this isn't really a positive thing. There's a thing called a negativity bias, which naturally makes us see more the negative than the positive. The brain tends to focus on the hassles rather than on the positivity. If we talk about a wellness week, and he was quoting a wellness week where the topics were eating disorders, bullying, drugs, well, that's not a wellness week. That's an illness week. And so he was saying that we need to make sure that we raise our level of positivity in the present moment. Once again, not what we're looking or wanting to do, it's actually in the present moment. And then if we raise our positivity, we get to a thing called the happiness advantage. Neurochemically again, when we are in that place, we learn better, we're much more efficient in our job, everything just seems to go well for us because we are in that place of having a happiness advantage. So how do we train our brain to give us that happiness advantage? Once again, we are coming to actions we can take. So it's not just a knowledge, it's what we're going to do about it. And he says there are 5 things that can help us train our brain into more positivity. The first is to have a gratitude practice, to maybe write a list of 3 things that you're happy with every single day. The second thing is to journal, if you are a person that can do that well, or you enjoy it. The third thing is to do exercise. We all know the side effects of those endorphins. The fourth is to do meditation, just to slow down, focus on our lives. And the fifth one is random act of kindness. So, and the last thing I would like to mention before wrapping up is don't compare. The minute we compare ourselves with others, it's the road to unhappiness, because there are always people who are going to be cleverer, more beautiful, thinner, whatever it may be. So if you are looking for happiness, comparison has to be put to the side. It doesn't serve you at all. So in conclusion, I hope that some of these tools have helped you and that you can start using them. If you have any more you would like to suggest, as always, I welcome you to write in the comment box below. But just to wrap it all up, we can choose to be happy. It is a decision that we make. And then once we've chosen to be happy, you can use some of the above tools that I've given you. Happiness is something we can work on, okay, by taking action. So that's really important. I think particularly for men like to take action, but for us, take action to make ourselves happier. Then enjoy what we have right now in the moment. Don't think of what we could have or what we should have. We don't want to compare. Okay? And then the last one is, we know that by caring for others, we actually are caring for ourselves. We are helping our body chemistry to put ourselves into a happy place. So I hope that those tools have helped you. And if you would like to get a list of the TED Talks that I have compiled on happiness, please don't hesitate to give me contact me on Facebook Messenger, or you can email me on Sherry Forsyth, spelled CHERRIFORSYTH @gmail.com. And I challenge you to be happier from this day as you step forward. Thank you so much for joining me.